Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Right or Die Show. I am your host, Randi-lee. On today's episode, I am going to be talking to Hayden Knight. Welcome, Hayden. Very excited to have you on the show.
Thank you. I'm really excited.
All right. So first, just tell us a little bit about, first, I like your glasses and they match your hair.
Thank you.
I love it. So for everybody who is listening and they're not watching, so Hayden's got like this awesome pink hair.
Yes.
A little bit longer than shoulder length, and
very good.
And the glasses match, is like the same color, and it just, I love it. So anyways, now tell us about who you are.
Thank you. I am a queer indie fantasy author, and I focus a lot on like character-driven narratives with themes of trauma and healing and found family, a lot of that.
Okay, so from that, I hear one thing about who you are and one thing about what you do.
Yes.
So give me a little more about who you are.
Oh gosh. Oh no. Yes.
It's the hardest question of the whole interview.
It is.
Really is.
It really is. Yeah. Yes. I've actually worked professionally in human resources, and I never ask people that question because the look on their face.
Yeah, I know. It brings me a lot of joy,
funny.
actually. I love it.
Yeah, exactly. Honestly. I am a human being, probably, allegedly. Just a lady doing my best, a big nerd. I like to jokingly call myself the coolest nerd. Very much a mixture of left and right brain person. Like, that's not technically supported by science, but the concept of the left and right brain, I am both of those people. Very analytical, very creative. I love video games and D&D, Dungeons and Dragons. Yeah. I'm obsessed. I have a cat that I'm obsessed with. I'm staring at her right now.
What is the kitty's name? Petunia. This is my favorite. Petunia. Yeah, this is my favorite part of the show, is finding everybody's animals. I love animals.
Yes. She hides if she knows that I'm like recording. She's camera shy, but her name is Petunia Petalfeet because she is polydactyl. So she has little oven mitts.
Oh, that is so cute.
Anyway, I can talk more about my cat than myself.
I know, it's so easy, right? It really is. Yes. But there you go. That is who you are. Now we'll get into other stuff. So first, I have had one other person who identified as queer on the show, and I asked them the same question.
Yes.
What does queer mean to you?
Yeah, no, that's a great question, because I know for some people in the LGBTQ community, queer is still a slur that they're not comfortable with.
Yes.
For me, it's just a really great loose identifier that doesn't require me to get super into very personal labels that can shift. So I like it because it's just basically, for me, it's like saying I don't live or want to live a heteronormative lifestyle. And a lot of my ideals and thinking are thus influenced. So that's kind of just what it means to me, is like living this very different lifestyle that is not as limited or as affected by heteronormative expectations and standards, the classic male-female relationships, binaries, words.
Yeah.
But yes, and then of course, obviously I'm part of the LGBTQ community. I don't think you should call yourself queer if you're not, but it's like it's just an easier word that I don't have to sit there and explain to people, because half the time if I use actual like specific terms, people look at me like it's test and they're about to fail. So I don't like to do that to them.
Yeah, there's a lot of terms coming out lately, and I'm trying my best to kind of stay on top of them, but it's really hard, especially like you said, a lot of people still see queer as a slur, and I grew up and it was. So when I hear other people saying, like you said, I'm queer, I'm like, did you just insult yourself?
What did you just say? Yeah.
Right. So it's tricky.
Yeah, it is difficult. I know for a lot of people, the more terms that we see, I'm lucky that I kind of had a slow introduction to it. Like, I think a lot of people in my age range, I'm in my late 20s and older, kind of got to have a slow introduction. I feel for younger LGBTQ people who kind of get it all at once. It's a lot.
Yeah.
But yeah, I've noticed, we see an increase in the specificity of these labels, which I think is wonderful. A lot of people really cling to that. I personally, as an individual, I don't care about specific labels with myself. It's not something I feel the need to figure out per se as specifically,
It's like there's a shift with, like you said, our generation and older compared to like my kids' generation. My youngest is 15. Mm-hmm. Where we were kind of like trying to get labels to not be a thing so much, and now the younger generation is like, no, I need to label myself. And I don't know, that's just what I'm seeing based on like having teenagers in my house.
No, I think that's very valid. I think I briefly studied psychology. I didn't finish college, but I know from a cognitive psychology class that our brain naturally wants to find these shortcuts. And that's what labels do for us. They're shortcuts. However, prejudice is also a shortcut. And so there can absolutely be that overlap. And if we're not mindful, they can be the same thing. We can sit there and have a label that is prejudice or discriminatory.
Yeah.
A lot of, I think, the younger generation right now, like I have a teenage sister, I think labels are much more comforting for them. And they allow each other to communicate while taking those like mental shortcuts, but in a more positive and convenient way. Yeah. I don't like to let people take mental shortcuts and make them do the work.
Gotta keep our brains thinking and active, right? You don't use it, you lose it. So.
Yes.
Excellent. Yeah, because I'm still wrapping my head around some of these different words. And like I said, I'm trying because it is new. And I think a lot of people, and this is, again, just things that I've seen and I've heard, a lot of people are scared to ask questions. But because they don't want to come off as seeming prejudiced or seeming like they're being mean. But at the same time, how do we know how to respond or how to communicate if we don't ask questions?
Mm-hmm. Right? I think that ties in wonderfully with mental health as well, which I think is something I noted in some of our conversations. But I actually know somebody who contacted me. I am a cis lady. I don't care if people use they, them for me or she, her, but I am a lady. And I had somebody contact me because they had a family member who came out as trans. They noticed like on social media, like a semi-distant family member. And they were like, what do I do? Hayden, what do I do? Do I use like she, her? Do I use this? Do I use this? Like, you can ask.
Yeah, ask them.
They were like so stressed out about it, which was sweet because they really cared, but they weren't as comfortable. And I'm obviously not the expert on like trans and pronouns and like all these ideas, but I know enough to be like, you're safe. You can ask.
Yes. Yeah, I know.
Appreciate it.
My kid, the one I was talking about, was 15, came out as trans 3.5 years ago, something like that. And so I've asked him a ton of questions because I have no clue, and I still screw it. Like, it's been 3.5 years, but it was also like, 11 years or, wow, my math is off, 12 years of say, that's my baby girl. And now I have to say that's my son. So I still mess it up sometimes, especially when I'm giving them shit, because just like any parent, my mom used to call me my brother's name before my name when you're getting in trouble. Right. Right. So I'll still be like, I'll still use his dead name sometimes. And then I'm like, whoops. So we actually so when he came out, he, like many of them, they pick a different name. So his birth name, or his dead name, as he likes to call it. I like to say birth name because I worked so hard. And here's the thing for parents out there. I don't care if I have a daughter or son. I don't care. It's my kid. Matter. I love them. Right. Mm-hmm. But I did have to take a little bit of mourning time because I worked so hard finding the perfect name. Mm-hmm. I was giving birth. Like, I was literally in the delivery room trying to think of a name because I had spent months and months and months trying to figure it out. And I had part of it, but I didn't have the whole thing. So I was still working on it. So, the birth name was Tisha Marie. And it meant so much to me because Tisha came from a derivative of my Nana's name, Letitia. And then Marie is from my other Nana's name. And so I just, when he's like, well, I'm a boy now, so I want my name to be Levin, I was like, oh, like I get that, I do, but
sometimes the things that you care, like that you actually affect you when somebody like comes out are totally different.
Yeah.
Than what, you know, I think what is commonly shown in media and even in writing and stuff. I remember my dearest friend who I lived with for 5 years, we met at college, totally random. My best friend, she came out before I knew what was going on with me, because it's not the most important thing for me personally. And not necessarily the most important thing for her either, but she came out to me by telling me she joined a lesbian sorority. And when I later, with her permission, was kind of expressing this to other people, and then also in my moment, I was like, a sorority? That was the first thought, because, you know, she wasn't that type of person, not like the traditionally feminine sorority. And it wasn't that type of sorority, but literally it's the first thing everybody said. Like, sorority, that was the more shocking part of that. And I think that's a fun example of, you know, someone coming out and being, you know, reasonably nervous because it's an anxious experience. And then the people hearing it are like, no, that's fine. What is this other thing?
But you're lesbian, cool, whatever, but
whatever,
sorority?
Nobody cares. Why are you doing a sorority?
Right. And that's basically how I felt. I was like, okay, because we had he has always had really broad shoulders compared to like your typical feminine body. He's very much built like my grandma, short, stocky kind of build. So we've always bought t-shirts in the guys section anyways.
Honestly, a good idea. Yeah.
And he's got big fat feet like me. I buy my shoes at the men's section because they're just a wider fit. So so like that kind of stuff didn't change. It was already stuff that we did. And so the biggest change was honestly just the name, and me getting over the fact that I picked this name, painstakingly picked this perfect name.
But unfortunately, it's a very feminine name.
It is a very,
and a lot of trans folks are like,
no, and I get that. So I had to go through some mourning for it. And so he's very sweet though, because he does want to have kids when he's older. I'm like, older.
Wait.
And so when he has a girl, if he has a girl, he's going to name her his dead name.
That's very sweet.
So I was like, that is sweet. Very, very sweet.
Very nice way to honor, you know,
but then But then the other part of that is I carried you for 9 months and I had to push you out and I had to, you know, wake up in the middle of the night with you, and you think you get to pick your name? What?
Right? Like, no, I think, you know, I will argue against that. I think it's a wonderful thing that the trans community has increasingly normalized the idea of changing your first name.
And I was okay with it, but I was just like, why don't I get a choice?
Why don't I get to have a say?
So, but he picked Levin, which I actually like, because obviously I like unique names like Tisha, right? So Levin, I was like, that's cool. But then, of course, again, going back to that, when your kid is in trouble, you tend to use first and middle name. And
you get used to the
exactly.
name that you've been yelling at.
So going Levin Catherine, and I'm like, and he's like, that's got to change too. And I'm like, yeah, okay, but I'm picking the middle name. So there we go. I got to pick the middle name. So I was like, okay, good. Mom still has a say, right? Like, and so that's because as parents, I mean, I don't know. I had fun picking the name. Like it gives you that connection with your kid, I think, because it's the first thing that you get to give them in this world.
That's true.
Right? It's that very first thing that you as the parent get to give them, and they get to keep that until I guess they don't want it anymore now. Right? But that's what you give them from your heart. And so that's the part that I had to mourn a little bit. But I mean, like I said, Levin's a pretty cool name, and I picked the middle name Tyson. Name, so now, you know, when he's into trouble, Levin Tyson, it works. It works for me.
It's a cool duo. But I think that's very sweet. But to be fair, with my experience, I don't think all parents put that much thought into it.
It's true. I did. So I had that moment.
But, you had that experience, exactly.
And I think it's valid that we recognize first that, you know, the kids are going through, or even not necessarily kids, because I had a cousin come out as trans and he's 30. She's 30. I don't see her much, so I actually haven't had a chance to like call her by her new name and stuff. But like, I think it's important that, and we have been recognizing the struggle that they're going through, especially coming out. And I think coming out at a later age to your parents too might be a little bit more tricky.
You know, I've heard different experiences. It sounds
Yeah.
like you know, I'm not an expert, obviously.
Yeah,
but
I'm just
like they are
guessing.
different experiences.
Yeah, exactly. But I think it's also valid to recognize the struggle that the parents go through. And I don't mean those parents that are assholes. I don't mean the parents that are disowning their kids. That struggle is just you're being
It's not real.
You know, sorry. If you are a true parent, you don't disown your kid because they just decide, not just decide, but they decide to tell you their truth, right?
Exactly.
But I think the struggle of just trying to rewire, we were talking about brains and stuff, trying to rewire our brains to start using new pronouns and new names. And if parents took the energy to find the right name like I did, right, to give them a little bit of time. And my kid was really good about that. And even like I said, sometimes I still mess up, and all he does is he just stops. And I'm like, what? And I'm like, oh, sorry. Like, because you don't realize
that's a fun response.
Yeah.
Yeah. You know, those little cues can be really helpful.
Yeah.
You know, obviously I can't speak to the trans experience, but I know in my experience as a queer person, and obviously having friends and a partner and you know, who are LGBTQ, I've definitely seen the many ways in which even like LGBTQ people have to mourn sometimes.
Yeah.
Whatever it was, maybe a previous identity they know is not right for them, but you know, there's a shift they have to make.
Yeah. It was still a life that they were living.
It was a life, exactly. Some, you know, the way I've seen some people talk about it, almost as if it's this different person, kind of how sometimes we talk about the child self, almost as if they're different. As well as, you know, expectations, or I've known people who had to kind of mourn the loss of heterosexuality in an interesting way. Like, it's not necessarily something they wanted, but that sense of you know, quote unquote normalcy, or this idea that life would be this specific way, they have to kind of almost mourn the easier route, if you will. Because I think it's fair to say that it is in our society still smoother to be heterosexual than queer. I didn't have those experiences, thankfully. I was kind of just like, oh, that explains so much. You know, I kind of had a lot of relief. Luckily, in that sense. Now, you know, I did not have the most supportive, you know, parents or anything like that. But yeah, I can't relate specifically to the mourning, but it is definitely something that I've heard about.
Yeah. And at least you can relate to the fact that, you know, you're outside of the normative.
Yeah, no, I think it's so funny because your lens is so different. I have an older cousin, like a distant, like a second cousin in the family, who reconnected with recently, who is also part of the LGBTQ community. I always refer to her as my gay cousin, but that might be a little too simplified.
Yeah.
I don't know the breadth of her identity, but you know, we kind of talked about it, and one thing that I noticed is we both kind of downplayed the challenges that we faced, because we were like, oh, it could have been a lot worse. Which I think is very common in the LGBTQ community. Is
I think it's common with a lot of not just LGBTQ, but even mental health and disabilities.
Absolutely.
We will often play down situations because somebody else had it worse.
Exactly.
But at the same time, we need to understand that other people didn't experience it at all. So don't compare yourself to anybody else, because you know, one person, I'm going to use a super simple example, a paper cut. All right. Yes. Super crazy simple. One person might get a paper cut and not even notice it and keep working away. Another person might get it and it could be stinging and hurting so bad that they're crying because you don't know where the pain threshold is. Well, that's the same thing with coping strategies. We don't know where somebody's resiliency threshold is. So we cannot compare. And we shouldn't be comparing, because everybody's life is different. Our views on the world, how we grew up, like it's such an intricate concept. But we often, and I've caught myself doing it before, don't get me wrong, like we, including myself, we do that. And sometimes it's to make ourselves feel better. Like I know when I've done it, it's usually to make myself feel better. Oh, well, that person had it worse. But then I think about it long and I'm like, did that actually make me feel better? Because it really didn't.
It's a way that we kind of silence that part of ourselves that's like, hey, I'm in pain. And we go, no, shut up.
Yeah,
I think that's what
exactly.
we're taught, is to just go, shut up, don't complain, don't whine, you're fine, you'll be fine.
Exactly.
That's not a very helpful strategy in the long term.
That's how we end up in therapy as adults. But it is something that we do, and now that we recognize, we can stop it.
Exactly.
So speaking of therapy, let's get into some mental health.
Mental health.
You start your story wherever it is that you want. I know, right?
I feel like for me, mental health really kind of reared its ugly head around the time of puberty, which of course, my luck, I hit puberty very young, around like six. Well, it gets worse, it gets younger, but around sixth grade, when I was, what is that, like 11-ish?
Yeah, my kid was younger. It was bad.
It's rough. You're like, dang.
Yeah.
But that's when it started to kind of rear its ugly head, which is also a terrible time because you are so like unprepared and
well, especially when you're young too, because you're probably one of your friends to be going through it.
Oh my God, yeah, like, nobody gets it. Nobody.
I was one of the last of my friends, so it was great.
Like everybody support me. Yes, I mean, yeah, that's awesome. Yeah, that's the best case scenario. Yeah, I didn't know the full breadth of what I was dealing with. I kind of figured out, that I had depression. It was kind of something in my family. It wasn't like we didn't talk about it, but it was definitely not addressed the way it should have. I kind of tried to do some therapy briefly, but at the time, that particular therapist I didn't really connect with. And she really encouraged me to start taking medication when I didn't feel comfortable with that step. At that point, I think around then I was like 14, and in my head I was like, that doesn't seem like a good idea. Now it can be for other people, but for me at the time, I just didn't feel like I felt like there was work I could do without medication that needed to be addressed. And I felt like this particular therapist and even my parents were kind of going like, oh, medication will help, just forget all of that. I'm like, no, I think it's important.
Yes, and it's such a good point that you bring up, because medication has its place and it's fabulous. I take medication and it helps. I've been off of it and I need it. But at the same time, I didn't bypass the work that needed to be done, right? Like you can't put a Band-Aid on a bleeding wound and expect it to stop bleeding before you've put direct pressure on it.
Exactly.
Right. That's kind of medication before the work. You got to do the work first and then continue doing the work even while you're on medication.
Oh yeah, exactly. The therapist I have now, I've had for about 3 or so years. She waited she kind of broached it, but I told her right from the get-go, I was like, this is kind of a bit of an issue for me, of like, medication being brought up too soon. I feel like there's something to be done. So she probably waited about a year before she started going, all right. This is what medication actually does. And I was like, okay, yes. So yeah, I've been on, I'm on 2 different antidepressants, and it helps me be able to function, which is wonderful. And everybody has their own different journey, but I kind of balked at therapy for a long time because of that. And, I went to high school, I dealt with, of course, downplaying a mild bullying situation. I was on.
All right, hold on.
We downplay, it's fine.
Hold on. So I had another guest, and she would put those the word just escaped me, the qualifiers in front of experience.
Exactly. Yeah, right.
And so I'm gonna get you to re-say that sentence without the qualifier, and then we'll go into it.
Yes, I dealt with a bullying situation. I dealt with that wasn't as bad as how the adults handled it, honestly. Like the bully doesn't matter.
I think that's a big part. Like when my kid was bullied, and even when I was bullied in school, the worst part was the adult side of it, because it didn't feel like they were giving me support when I was younger, went through it. It didn't seem like they were trying to solve the problem or give me the coping skills to deal with that issue. Like I have no idea what they did with the other person, because they don't actually ever tell you. But from my perspective, they didn't give me the coping strategies so that if this situation occurred again, which it did,
you would be okay.
Yeah, I couldn't deal with it again because they didn't teach me the coping strategies. It was simply like kind of like a brush off. Yeah. And so that was really not helpful. When my kid went through his bullying, the teachers basically just ignored it all. And so he took matters into his own hands because his was physical bullying that happened. So he took matters into his own hand. Yep. And guess what? Bully stopped bullying.
Would you look at that?
But then he got in trouble.
Of course. Well, that's always how it is.
Right. And in a sense, I get that because there's, a zero policy. But if
they say zero tolerance, but they only mean when
they catch you.
Yeah, exactly.
So like when the bully is being sneaky and only, pushing my kid or whatever when they're not around or their backs are turned, well, that's, it didn't work well. So then my kid was thinking, okay, these adults don't care because they're not, they're not seeing the beginning of the situation. They're only seeing the end of the situation and nothing's being resolved. So I think the adult side of things, you're right. It's far worse than the actual bullying, at least from our perspective.
Oh yeah, it really it taught me as a teenager at a very important formative age not to trust people, that people didn't care and that I was on my own if I had to deal with these issues, I didn't experience a lot of friend loyalty. I didn't experience a lot of support from my parents beyond performative. It was rough. And our school was very classic, zero tolerance. I followed the thing that really messed with me. And in some ways, I'm, grateful for some of I'm grateful for the lessons that I learned from this experience. I'm not grateful for the experience.
Yes, I like the way that you put that because you did learn things and it did help create the person that you are today.
Yes.
But man, did you really have to go through it?
I did, I shouldn't have had to. And I learned things. I took those lessons out of that. I could have just not learned anything. Well, Lord knows I've seen enough people not learn their lesson. That is possible.
So true. Yes.
But yeah, I really, I lost my train of thought. It's gone.
You were glad for the lessons.
I was glad for the lessons that I learned there. And one of them was that rules, I was a really big rule follower. I remember at one point, I had a stepdad growing up from 8, so basically my dad, but he would make fun of me all the time because I would get so anxious if he broke rules or something. He'd go into a do not enter and I'd be like, I was such a rule following kid, which is funny because then professionally I went into HR for a time, but I was such a rule follower. And so when I had this situation, I did everything you're supposed to do. I did everything they always tell you to do. I told my parents, I told teachers, I followed all of their directions. I did everything they told me to do. And they really just could not have cared less. And they taught me that you know what? Sometimes you do everything you're supposed to do and people still suck. And
it's
that's
true.
On them. Yeah.
And you're right. It is on them. That is not a downfall of you. No. That is a downfall of them. And sometimes people do just suck.
People do just suck. Especially when I became, because some of the relevant teachers were still fairly young, but when I reached their age, and then obviously past that, I'm I would never allow that to happen to a child in my, I don't even like kids. I would never let that happen.
At least you're honest about that you don't even like.
I don't like them. I don't want to be around them. But if I am, I'm sure as hell not gonna let them be traumatized if I have a say. I believe very firmly in the protection of children and their intelligence and their mental well-being. But yeah, I graduated high school, very traumatized for so many reasons. Tried to, get by for a while. And then eventually a few years ago, I finally was I don't think I can get any farther on my own. I think I need professional help, I felt I had done a lot of working on myself and a lot of progress at that point for being 23 or something.
A baby.
A little baby, exactly. But I was you know what? I think I need a professional. And I was very lucky to find my therapist right away. Found her on Psychology Today's website.
That website is so good.
So good. It lets you search for gender and certain keywords and things.
And all over the place, all over the world.
I was able to search for people that were LGBTQ friendly. It wasn't important to me that they be knowledgeable, it just was important that they're not going to give me any crap.
Yes.
Yeah. Exactly. And so that was all I really needed. But it was great to be able to search for exactly what I needed. And I found my therapist, and she is amazing. And I started seeing her and was very quickly like, yes, professional help. I was correct. It was time.
Yes.
Yeah, and it's improved. Well, it's been a process. I shouldn't say it's improved because that's almost too simplistic a term. I feel like healing from trauma and any kind of mental health is almost like a cyclical or like a spiral process that changes its sort of depth and the diameter of the spiral, and it's a lot of ups and downs and feeling like you're going backward and feeling like you're doing the same thing.
A lot of crying.
Just so much crying.
So much
hydrated.
Yes, so much crying. Like,
yes.
And I am not a crier. Like, ask my husband, I am not a crier. I mean, when my brother died, I did cry, but I talk about it now and I'm not even a tear in my eye. Like, right.
Well, there's that part of us that can like kind of stuff things in, and I'm trying to get better about like not doing that. So I've gotten a little bit better about being able to talk about certain things that affected me and cry while I'm talking about them, but then also still be okay. Because I'm like, I just needed to cry. It's fine.
Yeah, sometimes we just gotta cry it out and it's fine. It's fine. We just gotta move on now. Yeah. Excellent. So, okay. So sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you, but there's so much crying in therapy, and they always have Kleenex available. So don't worry.
Thank goodness. Yeah, I have a Kleenex now that I always have to keep by because I do remote now because obviously the pandemic and everything in life, and also it worked out. It's worked really well, and it's really nice. I think my therapist likes not having to deal with like any kind of commute, and I'm like, heck yes.
I love not having to deal with any kind of commute. So.
It's a lot easier to just pop in and then pop out and go back to your day.
Right. So much easier.
But yes, that's kind of been it. I've obviously gone through a lot in that time. That's something they never really tell you until you're in it. If you decide to really go hard with the healing, you're going to lose a lot of people and you're going to have to get used to being the one to cut those cords.
Yes. But on the flip side, you're losing people that don't need to be with you anymore.
People that aren't hopeful anymore.
Yeah, it's not healthy relationships that you're losing. I'm just moving my heater here. It's not healthy relationships that you're losing. It's the toxic relationships that you're losing. Yes. So it's definitely hard. I'm not saying it's easy, but it's worth it.
It is worth it, though. I think it's also, important, like kind of like you said, to acknowledge the grief. Talk about grief. Grief is constant. Is one thing that I've learned is it's in everything.
Yeah, exactly. So many people think grief, and actually I read a great book by one of the authors that I interviewed here, and what is it? Shut Up and Listen? Ooh. Grief? Is that what it was called? I got to remember the title of it. I lent it to my aunt after my brother died so she could read it too. But it was by Paulo, and I can't say her last name. Can't remember how to say it. Anyways, if you look back in the episodes, everybody, you will see who I am talking about. Definitely. But anyways, in that book, she explains that grief is more than what we perceive it as, because people perceive grief as somebody died. So now you are grieving. But relationships, identities, pets, moving homes, those are all things to grieve over. And they're all different capacities, right? Different amounts of time that you're going to grieve, but they are things that you can grieve, and it's okay that you're doing it, is basically what I want everyone to know. Is it is okay if you have went to therapy, decided, wow, this person is actually super toxic, and if they can't change, well, they can't be in my life. It's okay. Knowing how toxic they are, it's still okay to be upset that you have to cut them out.
Exactly. And it's never, and I wish there are definitely those situations where like this person is extremely toxic, and later, you still have to grieve those relationships, but sometimes it's a lot easier. Sometimes you're dealing with people who are just flawed people and you care about them very deeply, but you realize it's not a healthy relationship, or something happens very coincidentally, like timing, am I right? And you have to grieve something that had a lot of value in it. or that once had an extreme amount of value. And it's not always as clear cut as like, oh, this became abusive over time. It's like, maybe they're, friends, especially, I think, and a family as well, can be really complicated in some very interesting ways.
Oh,
Those
yeah.
the biggest, my biggest heartbreaks have always been friends, definitely not dating or any of that nonsense. I'm kidding. But it's always been friends because of the bonds that, many people share with their friend group and everything.
A friendship bond is deep. It is a lot deeper, I think, than people realize. Especially if you've been friends for a very long time. This person knows everything about you usually, right? Your friends are the people you go to when life is just so you go to your friends. So it's a huge relationship to sever if it needs to be severed, but sometimes after you go through that grieving process and go some time without that person in your life, you're like, wow, okay, I feel better.
Exactly. It tends to have like a long-term positive impact, which is wonderful. But I think it's also not very well talked about is the period of grieving and how difficult it is and how heartbreaking, especially, well, I shouldn't say especially, but I know as somebody who is LGBTQ, that found family is like a huge thing in the community. Partly because so many people lose real family members or have real family members who they like half lose, but like won't just call it. They love to do that.
I love this found family thing because like so many people are like, family, you have to, family. But ultimately, as we become adults, we do find our family. Like, I didn't know my husband before. Technically, that is my found family, right? So why is that different to view your friends as found family?
Exactly. It really isn't. People put a weird weight. And that's partly why I love writing. My favorite relationships to write are friendships and are very deep, almost familial bonds between people who didn't know each other a few weeks ago as we start to develop these. It's a huge theme in all of my books, sometimes with romantic partners, but mostly with friendships or even very brief encounters that, develop a bond over that lasts over time, even without a lot of communication. And so, in real life, when you lose those people for whatever reason, it's heartbreaking.
It is.
It's terrible. And
it's okay to be upset.
Exactly. That's so necessary. I think for me, in my brain, and hopefully this applies to a lot of people, the idea of grief is necessary. You can't avoid it. When grief comes up, you have to deal with it. As like if somebody died, you can't just ignore someone's death. We all know that doesn't work, even if we want to pretend it does. So I like to try to use that when I talk to people or even myself, and I'll be like, oh, I'm grieving the loss of something here. To tell myself like, hey, I have to actually let this happen and like let myself feel this way. Because sometimes we also grieve things like jobs or something that we don't even like.
Exactly. But it's still a transition. It's still change. You're grieving what you knew because the future can be scary sometimes.
The future is very scary. They say the devil
Exactly. As much as you might have hated it, you knew what it was, you knew what you were getting into.
Exactly. And so once that changes, there's always fear, there's always anxiety, there's always insecurity, and then there's always grief.
All right. So I'm gonna pull us back a little bit to your story.
Oh, yes.
So, all right. So you had went through depression and then you decided finally I need to go to therapy, found an amazing therapist. And did lots of crying and healing and finding yourself. And so where are we at today? Or I don't know if that was years ago or whatever, but where are we now?
Wow. I am a very different person, but I'm very much more myself, if that makes sense.
It makes total sense. In fact, the book that I released earlier this year called Embracing Me, all about finding myself. And once you find yourself and you're living your truth, that's the thing now, right? We always say
living your truth, but like
it's true though. I mean, I just hate the cliche of it, but it's true.
I know the cliche is rough.
But once you actually start doing that, life is really friggin' awesome.
Life is so much better, and it's so easy to forget. So I definitely encourage people to like remind yourself of through the healing journey about the things I used to deal with. Like I used to have to deal with a lot of obligation and a lot of exhaustion because of all of the things that I had to do just to keep people off my back. Exactly. That I didn't necessarily want to. All these, relationships, all these things that I did. And sometimes I remember, I'm like, oh, that used to be my life. And I don't do any of that anymore. I'm like, heck yes.
Yep.
It's so good. But as well as like, yeah, definitely the relationship with myself improving and getting to actually know the person that I really am. Something I think that maybe a lot of people, I specifically have complex PTSD, which I know isn't recognized in like the GSR and psychology book.
But whatever, we talk about it on the show real. Because it is real.
It is very real. They're just like, ugh, we don't want to add more to it. Like,
yeah, okay.
Right? Understandable, but still. I have complex PTSD all the way from like very early childhood. It's a great time. And so something that I experienced when I hit a very pivotal point in my healing, just a few months into therapy, y'all watch out. I was like 4 months in, and it all went down. But I realized that I had a very distorted view of myself and kind of watching that crumble almost like a statue and then having to rebuild a more accurate version of like who I was as a person and who I wanted to be and the life I wanted to live. And all of this has been, I think, one of the most rewarding parts of the journey is getting to look at myself and be like, no matter how much, because of mental health, I may struggle with things like self-loathing and insecurities, having more and more days where I'm like, good job. Good job, bitch.
Yeah. When you have more good days than bad days,
exactly,
is awesome. Keep going.
Yes. And then the bad days just become, it's at a point now where if I have a bit of a low, I like to use the term low, but like a bit of a depressive period, but not a full-on episode.
I like low too.
Low works. Then I kind of acknowledge it. I'm like, I'm just low. I'm just low today and I may be low tomorrow. I may start to come out of it. That's okay. This is just the little period that I'm going through, and so it becomes a little easier to accept the bad days. You don't have to like them, you don't have to enjoy them, but you have to accept that they're going to be there.
Oh, I love how you said that because we can't change the fact that they're gonna come. And they're gonna come unexpectedly. We can't really prepare for them. That's the joy of depression. But it doesn't mean that we have to wallow in them or try to change them. Like we don't have to try to change them. We just kind of as I like to think for myself, just kind of ride through that day because tomorrow might be better. Heck,
tomorrow might be better.
In 30 minutes, it might be better. Like
exactly. You never know. And I find that like, I've seen this in others and I've definitely seen it in myself. Feeling bad about feeling bad is much worse. Yes! Just let yourself feel the original bad and you don't know, maybe you'll stop feeling it so much faster than you've ever known. And that's been a lot of my experiences. I'm just like, okay, I got to get through this. I'm mad about it, but that's okay. I don't like it, but that's also okay. I don't have to like it. I had plans and that's okay. Like we're going to decide what we're going to kind of power through and decide what we need to adjust. Depending on everyday needs and what's going on. And like you said, sometimes it's only a couple hours and then I'll feel a lot better. But also it's important to remember to eat, take a nap, drink some water.
I was about to say naps are my reset. Like when
naps can be really good.
When I'm feeling low, it's all about the naps. All about the naps. And eating, and especially eating our fruits and vegetables, I like really notice if I haven't had fruits and vegetables in a while and I'm like, why do I feel like crap? Oh, I'm gonna go have an apple now.
Yes. I've been very lucky because currently I am trying full time to work on this whole writer thing. I don't know how long I'll be able to hold out at this point before I have to
everybody go buy a book.
Listen, yes, everybody please buy a book. But because I've had more time and more flexibility in the way that I work, I've also been able to enjoy cooking a lot more. So if anybody out there is blessed enough to have the time and energy, which I know is so difficult, and is interested at all in cooking, there's nothing better than being able to make for like myself and my partner, like just simple meals. We'll be like, oh, make some salmon and some rice or something. I started making tofu. I'm so fancy now. But even things that aren't necessarily considered, even if I make things that aren't necessarily considered healthy, it's always healthier than like eating out or eating junk food. And it feels so good. It feels so much better, just like emotionally and physically. I'm like,
yes,
my little spaghetti that I made at home.
oh, I love
Even if it's something
pasta.
that's simple. Yes, pasta. I will not give up carbs. Thank you so much.
Yeah,
Diet
no.
industry.
Well, and here's the thing. All right. So in my other life, not like a previous life, like my current life, just the other part of me. Anyways,
Yes.
I'm a personal trainer. And so I've taken lots of nutrition classes, blah, blah, blah.
Yes.
And carbs are not the enemy. All right, guys, carbs are not the enemy. Now, if you are loading up on horrible carbs, like sugary full carbs, there could be a problem. But
probably shouldn't eat like a full chocolate cake every day.
No, exactly. Don't do that. But you know, like if you're having some brown rice with your salmon, cool. Excellent. Great. That's a great choice.
Mm-hmm.
Right? It's about picking the right food, not avoiding an entire category of food.
Yes. And I think something so important relating to mental health, because I grew up in a family that ate out constantly. And I'm a bigger lady. I've always been bigger. The healthier I've gotten as I've aged, I've also still been bigger. So I don't know that it's a pure health issue. But I've gotten a lot of flack for it. I've dealt with a lot of, body shaming and stuff, and all of the fun fat, like minor fat phobia compared to people who deal with like the physical limitations and whatnot, body, all that fun stuff, diet culture, blah, 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 blah.
Yeah.
But something I started trying to do as an adult was doing a little bit better. And even as a teenager, I tried to start doing a little bit better. And that got me from a point where, as a teenager, I'm eating out all the time, like with my family. I'm eating really significant portions because when you eat out, you get big portions. So you think that's normal. I'm drinking a lot of soda, to now where I'm eating much more reasonable portions based on if I'm hungry. I'm eating home cooked meals several times a week, not every single day, but most days that I've made myself that are a lot healthier. I'm eating a lot more vegetables. I never ate vegetables, eating out a lot less. Good. Still drinking a lot of soda, but less soda.
Yeah.
Less,
and I don't know if where you are they have them, but they've come out with smaller cans than the typical one.
Those can be good. Sometimes I'll be like, we'll go on a smaller can life. Sometimes I can trick myself.
Yeah.
It depends. But yeah,
it's a good choice. Good option.
It's a good choice. Yes. Trying to shift away from like hating myself viciously from making all these bad choices and trying to more be excited about making just one better choice. I think that relates a lot to mental health. Like, one day when you're like, okay, I probably should socialize with somebody, just that one time being like, yes, I did it. That's awesome. Instead of being like, look at all the times I didn't do it, because that will enable you to get to a point. Like I never would have eaten tofu when I was younger and like veggies all the time.
Yeah, I'm still not sure if I can do the tofu, but veggies, I'm down.
Tofu's a good time. Well, you don't eat it straight up. Don't eat it straight up.
No, that would
spongy. You gotta put stuff in it or whatever. I don't know. But yeah, even eating fish and rice like for dinner. I'm like, but I do that now because slow changes. Like that's okay.
Yes. And I love that you say that. One better thing to try, one better food to try. And actually that's what we started doing with my kid. Just try this one new food this week, and not every day, right? Just for this one week, just one new food. And if you don't like it, cool, no problem. But making one better choice, and then you do that, and all these one better choices, they build up.
They add up, yes, because those better choices become normal, Obviously, they always say replacing things is better. So I drink a lot of water now, more than I did when I was very young, which is good because it gave me issues when I was young with dehydration. But, I try to replace, sugary drinks or something with a bit of water every day if I can. And, again, it's not about beating yourself up for having coffee 800 times a day, if that's what you do. It's just being excited when you make a healthier coffee shop. I don't know anything about coffee, but
yeah, me neither. But maybe less cream or sugar in it,
or maybe you one coffee of the day you switch for something like water. I don't know, tea. Exactly. I don't know. Is tea better than coffee? Maybe.
I don't know. Herbal tea is. I don't know about regular tea, because like regular tea still has lots of caffeine.
Like the caffeine and stuff.
Yeah, but herbal tea doesn't. So I don't know. I don't drink a lot of caffeine.
I drink soda and that's it. But yes, for people who know things about coffee, they probably know a way to do a healthy choice.
Yeah, you guys can put those comments down below. Let us know. Let us know.
I don't know anything. But as a somebody who in your other life is a personal trainer, you may know as well, like being mindful of misinformation is also really important if you're trying to make healthier mental health or physical health choices.
Yes.
You see so much nonsense where people are like, take a bubble bath. It's like that works great for some people. But that might.
Oh my goodness! For me, a bubble bath works wonders as long as it's an uninterrupted one. Because again, I have child.
You have child, so good luck with that.
That whole having a bubble bath uninterrupted is really great self-care and is amazing. But when you are like before I had my kid, it didn't have the same effect because I always had a bath by myself. Like it wasn't that big of a deal.
That's true. Like, yeah, me, if I take a bath, I'm just like, it's too small. I feel weird. I don't like it.
But even like just having a hot shower where nobody interrupts me, nobody's running in to use the bathroom. Because I mean, we have 2 bathrooms.
But of course, he just refuses to walk upstairs. Yeah.
Yeah. You're the mom. For the longest time, he would just come in and steal my shower. And I'm like,
I'm doing something.
I'm here right now in the shower. And he's like, yeah, but I need to shower. I'm like, cool.
All right, get out.
Yep. And like, he can only do that with mom because we have the same body structure, even though he is
of course.
Right? He still can't go and steal dad's shower because we have various body structures. But yeah, so having that shower to myself or having that bubble bath to myself is good. And so as a parent, I think that is very much directed at people who don't have the opportunity.
Exactly. Yes. Finding what actually works for you and your life and your body too. Like you probably know every body is like weird and different. Yeah. And like we talked, like carbs aren't inherently evil. But if you sit there and you're like, oh, a better choice I should make is to not eat any carbs ever. Yeah. You're like, probably going to drive yourself insane.
You're going to drive yourself insane. And eventually your body, like a good complex carbs, like say like a brown rice, gives you so much energy. It's when you eat like say a slice of white bread where the carbs in it just turn to sugar, so your energy you get from it is like much, right? Like much
so smaller. Yeah,
it's just making that healthy choice like we talked about.
Yeah, little bits at once, whatever feels manageable.
Yes, that is the most important. Don't try to change everything at once because you're setting yourself up for failure.
Exactly. It's not gonna be good. You're just gonna crash and then be mad at yourself for the crash. So you're gonna start off worse than you were.
Exactly. So like if you're going to therapy, don't start making diet changes until you've been in therapy a little while, because you know what? Not that I'm saying this is, you should not emotional eat. I'm an emotional eater.
All are.
But if after therapy you are so drained that you need a sandwich, go have that sandwich.
Who cares?
Because therapy is exhausting.
Therapy's a lot as you're trying to get used to that drain, or maybe you'll never use it. Maybe I know people who sometimes when they go do something, they always kind of get a little treat. And I'm like, that's great, go for it. I know someone who like every month has to go get painful like injections for physical health reasons. And so they go and get like a special coffee and a little treat. And I'm like, yes, enjoy that. You have to go do something that sucks. Yeah. That makes your life better. Obviously you don't want to be doing that constantly, but you also don't want to be getting like the injections constantly or dealing with this stuff constantly,
You gotta balance the stressful parts with the treats parts. Yeah. So, all right, what books have you written and where can we find them to help you continue to be a full-time author?
Oh my gosh. Right now, just one is out. It's called Queen of Magic, The Revolution. I'm a fantasy author. But I like to say fantasy that is very like realistic people with realistic issues. Mental health is fine, but there's also dragons because that's how I like to write. Okay. Not 20 pages of describing food. That's for some people. That's not for me.
Oh, I hate those books. I'm just like I really personally enjoy books that have a lot of dialogue because sometimes, yes, good. Because sometimes I'll read a book and I'm going to pick on Stephen King for a hot second. I love him.
Yes.
First author that I read a book all the way through. So it's not that I don't like his stuff. But there are times I will skip entire paragraphs because he's describing, you know, the scene or describing the outfit or whatever. And I am not the type of person who can visualize that. Like, I cannot picture faces when I'm reading.
Oh yeah,
I can't.
Absolutely.
So I describe.
Yeah, I can't, like, we can't make up faces in our brain. Apparently that is like I've read this as a study. It's a scientific fact. We can only pull from what we've seen. So whenever I try to describe characters, I try to pick certain specific characteristics. Like, I know it's a little cheesy to do eye and hair color, but that works for people. Or to be like, oh, this person has very sharp features. This person's very tall. This person doesn't look so great. Yeah. So you remember these key features. But yes, I am a very I like to write as if my audience has a million better things to be doing. And I need to and not with the sensationalism of like constantly making bad things happen or whatever, none of that nonsense. But I like to write as if they have a million better things to do. So I need to make it worth their time to be sitting here and reading a book or whatever.
Yeah, I like that because I have skipped entire paragraphs where I'm like, I am not reading about the way that this room is set up. I don't care. I can't see it in my head. Get to the point and
exactly
go to the dialogue.
If anything, that's my weakness as a writer, is I'm not quite as good at that. I have to add a lot in my first rounds of editing, add a lot of content. But yes, it's Queen of Magic: The Revolution. As you can imagine, it follows a woman in this world. She's a witch who unknowing or unwittingly and very much not per her life plan ends up being involved in a revolution among the sort of non-human magical people of this particular continent. So again, very much a not the most like openly queer story in the first book. It's really, the first one is very much establishing.
And how many are going to be in this series?
3 or 4. The second one is almost done. And when I say almost done, I mean lots of rounds of editing. I have one more like little bit of thing that I'm working on, and then I have to format it and then send it to an editor. So it's very near completion. And then the third one, I already have a first draft at least written.
Oh, nice. Okay.
So my plan is very much to, I would love to have, I'm really hoping to do 2 and 3 next year. But if I could get the rest of the series done next year, that's my stretch goal. Just because so much of it's already done. I don't think it's a good idea to write several books in a year if you don't already have so much. But it deals with some issues surrounding, you know, sexism and classism and what have you. But I do kind of get over a lot of that. You know, like, I don't want to portray too much of that because it just stops being fun at a certain point. It deals a lot with kind of what we talked about, like living authentically and accepting yourself as is, and kind of, I wrote this protagonist, this witch character, as almost an anti-hero style character, but also, of course, she's a woman. We don't get to see a lot of characters portrayed as anti-heroes when they're women. There's probably tons of them, we just don't acknowledge it. This person who isn't very nice or lovely and isn't very cool, but she's the only person that can help this group, literally the only one in existence. And she also desperately needs some help of her own. So dealing with a very strong-willed protagonist, who then through the course of the series obviously changes a lot and becomes somebody who cares a great deal. Deals with some mental health issues, of course, different types of it, different types of trauma and like PTSD, and different characters that, of course, in the further series will be more of a big deal, and of course, you know, some more queer themes will be a little bit more of a big deal in the second book onward. But yes, it's a lot of fun, and a lot of I don't know if you're familiar with The Good Place. The Good Place is so good. Obviously this book I've been working on for a very long time, but The Good Place, if I'm remembering correctly, they really lean on the philosophy that people who aren't great become good people if they are surrounded by people who will encourage that growth and allow that growth, right? So it's really about who you're surrounded by, and that's very much something that applies to this novel in this series. Sometimes groups of the protagonist, there's one very important secondary character who is just her and him. They're just like, we're terrible people. We're awful. We hate each other, but their friendship becomes integral to the entire plot. And watching even just this first book as they get familiar with each other and they start to actually care about each other as people, but also don't want to admit it. And it's kind of being around these people that allow that growth, allows us to become the person that we thought we couldn't be, but very much wanted to.
Okay, I can get down with that. Cool. Yeah. And where do we pick up the copy?
It's on Amazon. I also have my site, authorhaydenight.com. And my name, how it's spelled, is probably somewhere.
Yes. So we are going to have the links down in the description
below. Thank you. Check
with
it
the
out.
Links to your social media. So tell us what those are.
I'm really I have a Twitter somewhere, but really mostly I'm on Instagram at Author Hayden Knight. I try to keep it consistent. You can check me out there. I awkwardly am very bad at social media, so it's a good time. You can just come laugh at me as I attempt to engage with the world. I've already done one giveaway on there, so definitely keep an eye out. Also, if I can plug this, anybody who's interested, if you go to my site, and it's very early on, just scroll down a smidge, or even there's a header, you can actually read the first part of the novel. Like not the first chapter, the first part, totally for free. If that's something you would like to do, you can kind of test it out, decide if it's for you. And then if it is, you can look at getting the full thing and enjoying the whole thing. But yeah, it'll introduce you to 3 very important primary characters. It'll introduce you to kind of almost this subplot that gets nicely resolved. Well, it gets resolved in part 1. So you get a lot of fun and a lot of content in there to test it out.
Awesome. Perfect. So again, those links down in the description below. So hit them up, give Hayden some love. And thank you so much for being on the show.
Thank you for having me so much. I was really excited about this, so I'm glad it worked out.
Yes. Yeah. So I had to reschedule a Hayden once because I had no power in the house.
Oh no, that's what
happened. I had no power in the house. That might have.
I'm glad you have power.
It was either that or the time that I hurt my back and I couldn't move. It was one of those. I had to do a couple.
These very debilitating things. You know, I never ask when people have to reschedule. Usually, I think I was just like, I hope it gets better. I don't know, because I'm like, you don't have to tell me all your details if you don't want to.
Exactly.
And then I don't want people to feel like they have to justify it. I'm like, whatever, I'll reschedule. But those are very debilitating.
Yeah, those are things that I just there was no way around it. Rescheduling was a thing. So so perfect. So thank you again.
Thank you. It's been so fun.
All right, so make sure that you hit this like and subscribe button here at the channel. Share these episodes out. We've got important messages to send out to the world, so help us do that. You can also help by purchasing something off of our merch store. 10% of the proceeds goes back to the Canadian Mental Health Association. As well, if you would like to be one of our patrons on the Patreon page, head on over there and do that as well. And remember, the only way to end the stigma of mental health is to speak openly and honestly. Bye.